Good afternoon. Doreen, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you to Federico for making this possible. Federico Vivanco, many of you know him. Federico has did English studies at UNED and a master's in education, but his specialty is African literature. He has translated and has put together several anthologies and also a literary coordinator at the Finnish African Society. And he also works at the Universidad 3 de Febrero, which is another university here, and also worked in Mexico. So Federico, thank you very much for making this meeting possible. This event, this meeting with Doreen, is just the beginning, or like an advance of what Federico will be teaching very soon on African literature, and which will have these interviews with writers from Africa on a regular basis. And just a few words to describe our center of studies. Our center is linked to hermeneutics, but also to issues relating to translation. But just in this first perspective, our goal and our intention is to come closer together and to approach a different way of seeing the world, getting to know different worlds, and also knowing each other and knowing what those differences are. And not just those differences, but also finding similarities between different worlds. And the differences and similarities that exist between the African and our small village here on this side of the ocean. So to put into perspective our common problems, our difficulties, and I really think that this first meeting has helped us significantly to move in that direction. Thank you, Federico. You have the floor. Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure to work with Federico because we've had a very fluid dialogue with Federico, so thank you. On the contrary, for me, it's a pleasure, and to disseminate African literature is very important for me on both sides of the Atlantic. So for me, it is an honor to be participating and to collaborate with you and collaborate with this prestigious public university in Argentina, as is the University of San Martin. So it's me who thanks you. For those of you who are in Latin America, and for us in Spain, it's 11 p.m. already. And also good morning to Doreen, who is starting her day Friday in Australia. I would like to thank the Center for Hermeneutics in the Universidad de San Martin, thank the organizers of this seminar, Carlos, Marina, Laura. Thank you to Barbara and Catalina, the interpreters. Thank you very much for offering us this space, which is so necessary to promote African literature and to disseminate the authors from that region of the world. For us, it is a pleasure to have Doreen Baingana with us today. As Carlos mentioned briefly, She is the first step in the series of webinars that will be bringing participants closer together and closer to African literature with a multidisciplinary approach, and to highlight issues that have to do with the different aspects of the continent and the literary analysis of the different narratives, short stories, poetry, novels, and essays. In the seminar, we will establish a system where we will do commented reading, and the students will receive different tools to analyze texts from a perspective based on analysis and discussion of the stories, the poetry, and the novels. This course will also include the participation of several African authors from the African continent and from the diaspora. And the next academic course in Argentina that will start in March will last 1 academic year, with sessions lasting 1 hour and a half, and it will take place on Friday every 2 weeks. So one Friday, every other Friday. We will be disseminating this activity through social media and in the website of our center.
I'm gonna continue in English. Our guest this evening is a critically acclaimed author from Uganda, Doreen Baingana. She was raised in Entebbe, where she obtained a law degree from Makerere University and a master's in creative writing from the University of Maryland, College Park, United States. Her short story collection, Tropical Fish, won the Commonwealth Writers' Prize for the Best First Book, African Region in 2006. Stories in it were finalists for the Kent Prize in 2004 and 2005. She was also a Kent Prize finalist 2 years ago in 2021. Baingana has published 2 children's books, as well as short stories, essays, and articles in numerous journals and magazines. Her story had been broadcast on Voice of America and BBC, and had been included in many anthologies. She embarked on a PhD in creative writing at the University of Queensland, Australia in 2023. Doreen Baingana, we are really honored to be able to share this conversation with you. Thank you for being here with us and for taking time out of your busy schedule to have a chat with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for inviting me, for arranging all this. Thank you to the University of San Martin, is it? The center. I'm really pleased. And a special thanks to Marcela, my publisher in Argentina, for making my work available in Spanish. And you all are, it's very late, I understand, but I'm really grateful that you've put all this together.
Yeah, that's not a problem whatsoever. So it's just Thursday, you know. So Doreen, my first question is related to the Uganda literature, especially written by female writers. The literary world has always been and remains dominated by men. But I have observed in the last 10 or 15 years that the literary scene in Uganda has changed significantly. Contemporary Uganda female writers such as Jennifer Makumbi, Violet Barungi, Beatrice Langwaka, Jackie Budesta Batanda, and you, Doreen Baingana, among others, are silently playing a very influential and decisive role in the promotion of Uganda writing. How is the situation right now in Uganda? Can we assert that Uganda female writers are nowadays the pioneering voices and protagonists to place the Ugandan literature onto the national and international scene of literature?
A good question. Maybe one that the men in Uganda might not like very much. but yes, it is true that women have been writing a lot of books that have been recognized. And I think this is partly due to, as you know, in the 60s, the wave of African writers was very much dominated by men. So the assumption was African literature is written by men, even though there were some women's names. So I think more women coming to the forefront was just an equalizer, but it was seen as something special. But I would add that, first of all, women have always been storytellers from the dawn of civilization, sitting around the fire with our grandparents. Women have always had that role of telling stories. Why we have come into print mostly has to do, I think, with our education system, where there have been enough, avenues for women to get educated. But I would put a lot of that success due to organizations such as FemRight that have really nurtured and given a platform for women to have their say. So even though many of the writers develop their work in the diaspora, there's still that sort of home space of FemRight.
That leads me to my next question, and it's related to FemRight. You have just mentioned FemRight, the Uganda Women Writers Association. This is a non-profit organization that focuses on promoting women's writing in Uganda. What has been the role of this organization and your work in it to promote the Uganda literature written by women?
So FemRight was started in 1996, so it's been there a while, and it publishes, it promotes, it advocates for women's writing, and it's also sort of a community space for women to come together and not only discuss stories, but discuss the writing life, look for publishing opportunities. There is a library, there's a resource center, things that, generally speaking, are harder to get. Uganda is a third world country. So it's very good that there's this place that has a resource center that has connections internationally and regionally. And most especially that sense of community of women doing this thing together and seeing each other's success. So, and we have also tried to reach out. So it's not only the urban women, but also, for example, going out and doing interviews in the rural areas, and then having the FemRight writers sort of translate and then document those interviews into books. So we're trying to also be, to give space for those women who cannot necessarily write, but have their stories, have stories to be told.
Face and voice as well.
Yes.
Doreen, have you noticed lately, probably in the last 10, 12 years, flourishing of the African literatures in Western countries? Are the African diasporic writers triggering such flourishing?
Indeed, they are. It is true. I do remember when I first started to write, I also was based in the United States at that time. And obviously, there are more resources. There are the writing programs where you can study the craft. Excuse me, my son is going to school, but that's okay. And just because of sort of I would say the inequality of resources that many African writers have been either to the US or the UK to develop their craft, to get publishers. And the wave, there are certain writers who have done really, really well commercially and in academia, like Chimamanda Adichie Ngozi, I think is a household name. And once publishers saw that you could publish an African writer and it's commercially viable, it opened the door for many other writers. So yes, there has been a new wave of writing. And I think also there's just been is it a liberalism? That openness to realize that at least in the English language, I think people are realizing the freshness and the rejuvenation of the English language by Africans, Indians, Caribbeans, others who use the language in new ways. And that has also heightened the interest and I think maybe perhaps not only in English, even in the French-speaking world, African writers are winning prizes and gaining prominence.
All right, thank you. So Doreen, who are some of your literary influences and your favorite authors? I know it's a tricky question, I'm sorry.
I keep on, my writers keep changing. The more I read, there are more writers that I love. But I think some all-time favorites, Toni Morrison has been a big influence. Toni Morrison is the American writer who was, I think, the first Black woman to win the Nobel Prize. And another one would be Nadine Gordimer. Nadine Gordimer is a South African writer who did a lot with the anti-apartheid movement in portraying, the South Africa of that time. And both have passed away, but I really love the way they represent their communities, but also very much it's political work, but it's not overtly political. They really deal with heavy, important issues, but they do not at the price of the art. So both of them write with very lyrical language and intense characters. They are at the top of their craft. Both of them are Nobel Prize winners. And I feel that they are my beacon. If I can write at that level, I will have arrived. And there are many others, but there are those two notable ones.
Good. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Now I'd like to move on to your short story collection, Tropical Fish. It was published in 2005 in English and translated into Swedish, French, and published in Argentina and Spanish just last year in 2022. This is a collection of interconnected stories that follows the lives of three Ugandan sisters, each navigating their unique challenges and aspirations in a changing society. This evocative prose explores themes of family, love, cultural identity, and the impact of Uganda's history on their lives. Baingana, as all these stories are intertwined or connected together, how can we define the structure of the book?
I have liked to call it is called a novel in stories. So I was trying to get the best of both worlds. I think I was primarily a short story writer, and I initially wrote them as individual stories. But as I was compiling the collection, I noticed that the girls all come from one particular socioeconomic context and one town, Entebbe, and then there's a sequence. The stories, the girls grow older and older. So I thought it would be best to have them as sisters and then have this sort of question of what happens when you all come from one milieu, let's say, and take divergent paths. What causes that? So I wanted to take advantage of both the benefits of a novel, or the good things about a novel is that you can follow characters over a longer arc over the years and see their changes. But also with a short story, you have the impact of smaller plots and dealing with themes in a sort of smaller, with that unity of the short story. So I think I was trying to get the best of both worlds. And so that is my novel in stories.
You did, yeah. Is this structure of short stories linked to the orality or orature? Is this part of a literary tradition or an African or Ugandan literary field?
I wish I could say so, but I don't think in particular. You're the one studying African literature, maybe you tell me. I really don't think so. I wasn't, at least I didn't have it in mind as trying to follow some sort of tradition. We do have, a lot of folk tales that are short and also more epic, epic longer narratives. But I wasn't deliberately trying to form some sort of African tradition. Unfortunately, because of our Western education, we have been influenced a lot by the Western tradition. So I wasn't necessarily thinking about orature, but I have a feeling that in the stories themselves, that seeps in, even if it's not deliberate, just because it's part of my culture.
All right. So although the stories take place in the 1980s and early 1990s, we can place the birth of the three sisters during the worst eras in the history of Uganda, the government of Idi Amin during the 1970s. Unfortunately, when Uganda is mentioned in the West, the only reference we have is the 8-year government of the butcher of Uganda, unfortunately. But let's see the glass half full. This era also coincide with the independence movement, the Pan-African fervor, and the flourishing of African literatures in European languages. How do you think this historical era affects the protagonist and the general plot of this short story collection?
That's a very good question. I think my intent was not to put the politics right in the forefront. It's, I think, really subtle in the back of the stories. I don't know how many of the audience have read the stories, but I was, I think, trying to resist what you talked about, this sort of negative history that has been in the news about failing states, about the president, who was a butcher and all that, which some of those things were true, but in my own experience growing up, I experienced what you would call a normal childhood. I was lucky enough to have parents who were civil servants, so it was a middle class upbringing in this town of Entebbe, and that even though the president lived, somewhere not too far, there was a state house, the terror and the violence as a child, we were protected from. And so I really wanted to show that there is an Africa beyond the news headlines. There's a reality, especially for children, of people still being able to play, people still having games, people still falling in love, people doing, all the usual things that people do. So, and I also was very conscious of what is the feminist logo, the personal is political. So my focus was very much on their personal lives and sort of the internal emotions and psychology, rather than the overtly political events. And so one reading it may not necessarily know there was such terror in the background, but I do think that in some details, I do bring it up in a subtle way. There's a story about HIV/AIDS that is much more, that really brings it out in the forefront, that really talks about what was going on economically, comparing the rural and the urban areas. But I wanted to shift away from the news headlines to bring more nuance to the conversation, I think. Have that answered your question?
Yes, yeah, definitely. I recall that short story. Yeah, the way you focus the HIV issue. Yeah, it was epistolar narrative indeed.
Yes.
Beautifully written. Two of your short stories from this short story collection, Tropical Fish, were finalists for the Kent Prize in 2004 and 2005. You also, Doreen, were a Kent Prize finalist for the third time 2 years ago. Kent Prize for African Writing is annual Literary Award for the best original short story by an African writer, whether in Africa or elsewhere, published in the English language. What does the Kane Prize mean to you, as it does to so many African authors?
I am actually grateful to the Kane Prize that it made my work and my name known across the African continent, because when the book was first published, it was published in the United States and the audience were mostly Americans. But when I was nominated for the Kane Prize, people on the continent were then knew about my work, and it was through the Kane Prize that publishers in South Africa and in Nigeria were interested in the book, and they published versions of the book. So it's really directly related to the dissemination of my work, which I think is what a prize is meant to do. So I'm really very grateful. And also it helped me meet some other writers, African writers, most especially Binyavanga Wainaina. I don't know if you have heard of him. He has passed on now, but he was such a fire. He really wanted to promote African writing. And I met him through the Kane Prize, and he would organize conferences and workshops in Kenya through Kwani, and I got to know so many other African writers. And it was at one point quite a community of writers, which I always feel people think that writing is you're alone in your room with the muse, having this private conversation. But I think a lot, you're fed by what other writers are saying and doing, and either in opposition or together, just builds the work. And that happened for me through the Kane Prize, the network and connections.
You mentioned Binyavanga Wainaina. We read last month with my group in Mexico. I will write about this place just a month ago. Yeah.
Okay, good.
So yeah. So there's a concern that is very tangible through your stories. This is identity and tradition. Why is this so important for most African writers, and also your writing? Can tradition and modernity coexist together?
That's a very large question. Well, I guess we have to say like tradition, in quotes, and modernity, because they are really fluid and they flow into each other. I know usually for us in the African space, we are seen as being more, leading towards tradition, and the West equals modernity. But I would like to sort of question that assumption, because I think that modernity, of course, now we all know modernity is a global phenomenon, and all sorts of cultures around the world have been influencing each other to enter into this modern space. But yes, I think there has always been some sort of tension because of the colonial encounter, where there's a sense, especially for example in the arts and in writing, that I'll just use the example of language. For those of us who write in English, we are seen to be turning away from the more traditional aesthetic of writing in the local language. The way I see it is that culture is always changing. And perhaps one of the change is that we have new languages to work in, so that the tradition and the modernity are not in opposition or not in conflict, but actually a continual, it's a fluid thing. And with my own work, I am conscious. I think I have the privilege of feeding myself with all that the world has to offer, the modern world. At the same time, I have this rich tradition that I can hark back to and also be fed from. But I think it is, the post-colonial reality that is always seen as tension. There's always that tension. Are we Are we just mimicking? Is there the issue of authenticity? But even that issue of authenticity, like, am I doing real African literature? Maybe a false question, because there is no such thing as authentic. All cultures have influenced each other. I could go on and on and on this. It's a big question, but I think that I think it makes our work more exciting. When for example, I ask myself, how can I bring orality into my writing? It is always a challenge. How can I, but I don't want to see it in opposition, in short. I don't want to juxtapose those two things as oppositional, but in fact, they can actually feed each other positively.
All right, thank you. Thanks a lot for answer. One of my fields of research, and the one I have been working on for the last 7 years of my doctoral thesis, is that of motherhood and how it is represented in African literatures, especially in Nigerian literature through the works of Buchi Mecheta, Chota Wampa, and Lola Shonajin. Avoiding falling into generalizations when talking about Africa, was motherhood in Uganda in the 1960s and 1970s an obligation or a choice? And what is it like today in 2023?
Okay, that's an interesting topic, motherhood. I wish I could ask you why you are interested in that topic in particular. But again, to avoid generalities, but I think I can assert that yes, it was an obligation in the 60s and 70s to be a woman. The identity of a woman meant being a mother. And you were either, even in your name, you're either the child of somebody, and then you transfer to being the mother of your mama so and so. So you're as a woman, you're named after your child, your eldest child. And it almost as if you have no identity of your own. And it has changed a little bit now, but it was in a strange way an obligation that was so internalized that people actually did feel that they wanted to be mothers. I think that's the power of I think patriarchy, where the social norms become internalized. It's pretty much, I think there are more women now have the choice, but still the choice is more about the number of children. Instead of having 10, 11 children, maybe now people can have 3 or 2 or something. And it's seen as we have a proverb which says, it is so tragic. I'm trying to translate. The tragedy is that even barren women have breasts. It's like, what's the purpose of them of breasts if you don't have children? But I think things are slowly changing, where women would not overtly say that I choose not to have children, but either that my career or there are other forms of identity, not necessarily a negative one of I don't want to have children, but rather there are other ways to form an identity as a woman that is not motherhood.
Thank you so much for your answer. I feel better now. Iago, who's from Galicia, he knows why I'm asking this. We just had a congress a month ago in Granada University, and I had big trouble regarding this matter with 2 African people. So,
of course, there are many views. There are many views on this, but I think that's what I've seen in my experience.
All right. So, last but not least, although you are currently in Australia doing your PhD, are you going to delight us soon with a novel or a collection of short stories?
Well, actually, I would like to celebrate because a novel I've been working on for quite a long time has just last week won a mentorship award with the University of Queensland Press. So I can submit the whole manuscript and I'll get editorial feedback and possible publication. It's one of the more important small presses in Australia that has published really good writers here. So it is, I do hope, I mean, the publishing process takes a while, so I don't know, maybe end of 2024 or early 2025. Funnily enough, this is about, I don't know if you know, Alice Lakwena, who was from northern Uganda. She's sort of a Joan of Arc figure who led a rebellion in northern Uganda in the late 80s using traditional and Christian unconventional weapons, you know, holy oil, anointing, things like that. And one of the sources, I think, of her power was that she was barren. She was barren, so she was a social outcast. And I think, you know, there's a way where the social outcast can turn it and it becomes sort of a powerful tool. You know, when you're on the outside of society, you stand out. So that's part of her strength of being a woman who is not a woman. Anyway, I hope that comes out soon and I will keep you posted.
Fingers crossed.
Yes.
Yeah. Doreen, I would love to give 10 minutes for questions, okay, to the audience.
Okay.
I have so many questions. I can spend hours and hours talking with you. It's a pleasure. But I would love to, to have some questions from the audience. So let's have 10 minutes more or less, okay?
Okay.
And
okay, sure.
Thank you.
Obviamente pueden preguntar en español, en castellano pueden
You can
preguntar.
ask in Spanish or in English, as you wish.
Claro, como quieran.
You can take,
Carlos
should they
tiene una
take the floor
pregunta.
directly or should they raise their hand?
Carlos
I
tiene
would
una
like to
pregunta.
ask a question.
¿Quién preguntó? Carlos primero, ¿no? Y después alguien dijo, no sé quién. Carlos.
So, Doreen, in the stories included in Tropical Fish, when the young women talk amongst themselves, in my view, I was very surprised to see a language typically observed in teenagers and that freshness, you know, that natural element of young girls speaking, teenagers, you know, how they speak and about their small or big problems. Even mixing, you know, this with other languages as well. How were you able to step away from the academic writing in order to, in a way, recover that natural way of speaking that teenagers, that young women have when they're at school or at home?
Thank you for that observation. And thank you again for inviting me. I wonder, I feel as if from a very, very, at the real bottom of it, sometimes we are not exactly sure as writers how we do what we do. I think that at some level it's a bit intuitive. At the same time, I think it's really about placing oneself back in the situation. You know, we all have had childhoods. And I think for me, it was just it was about the imagination coupled with memory, stepping back and putting myself directly in that space. What helps also is thinking about, when you think about the five senses and you're creating a setting and a place, using the five senses to go back in that place. And I think once that setting is real for you or for me as a writer, then it's easier for the voice to come out. Or maybe I'm still childlike. I don't know. But so it's part craft, and it's part intuitive, and it's part good luck.
Thank you, Doreen. Is there anyone else who wanted to ask a question? I think it was Jimena. Go ahead. Good evening, good afternoon. Hi, Doreen, and thank you very much for your time. I would like to revisit one thing you said that you mentioned in one of your answers, which has to do with the use of the different languages. And I was always very interested in finding that out about African literature, this dispute that exists between those who promote the position Wationgo and going back to the native languages, quote unquote, and the other position, which in a way promotes the use of the colonizer's language, which has already been owned by the people there. So do you think that this dispute still exists? Is it valid to think about African literature, or is it no longer valid as a dispute? Because in Latin America, we were also affected by that type of dispute, and sometimes that dispute reemerges with the indigenous peoples of our territory.
Yeah, I think the dispute still exists. I think it's a question which every time I do speak to the public, it is, why do you write in English? And I think it also comes from essentializing. It comes from essentializing. What does it mean to be African? To be African means only this. So I'm even surprised people don't ask, why am I wearing a dress? Why am I not wearing skin? And backcloth. Nobody says, oh, this dress is Western, you shouldn't be wearing it. It's to be ridiculous. Like I said, I think we are all in the modern world. That modern world, whether we like it or not, is now a global one. And in the global one, there are certain cultures, just like in so many cultures now, the dollar is used, the US dollar. For better or for worse, we have this thing called English or French or Spanish. What are we to do with it? I like Derek Walcott's view on this. He was from the Caribbean, a poet. And he said, English is a tool of the imagination, which can be said of any language. What if we were to see it as a tool? I know it can be, there are some people who are of the view that language itself is a colonizing thing. I don't know what the word is. But I can also step back and make the choice and seeing it is a tool at my disposal. I have this reality of having my education in English. We do not have the resources to go back to the drawing board and make my mother tongue to make as many people read my mother tongue as they do read English. So why not see what we can do with what we have now? That's what I think. It's just practical, it's just pragmatic. And out of this practical and pragmatic thing, I think we have, taken the English away from England and made it something completely different, something completely rich. You will notice among the musicians, nobody asks, why do you use the piano? Why don't you just use the thumb piano only? Musicians have no, no problem at all harnessing all sorts of cultures and still creating what you'd call authentic or genuine Jamaican music or Cuban music or whatever, with all these sources. So I don't know why us as writers are not allowed to use whatever is at our disposal to keep making culture go forward. So unfortunately, the former colonizers may feel that they are benefiting, but we are also benefiting in our own way. I was a judge of the Commonwealth Prize. It was in 2013. So Commonwealth Prize is sort of all the languages. And I can tell you that some of the short stories from the Caribbean, from India, from Africa, were just so rich in the use of language compared to, now this is going to be, I don't want to be short, but just rich, there was a rich freshness compared to some of the stories from the UK, even in Australia. So, unfortunately, I am aware it comes at the cost of these indigenous languages. I wish we had the resources to do both instead of it being either or. I could go on and on. You can say I'm very passionate about this topic, but yeah, that's my short answer.
Able to use both, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We just have 3-4 minutes for the very last question.
Pueden levantar la mano o
Any
el
other
micrófono o
questions?
pedir el turno.
Yes, I would like to ask one question.
Vamos, adelante.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Kind of.
Yes.
Well, it's actually 2 short questions to Doreen. So I met your text, well, some of the stories from your collection a couple of years ago while I was doing my undergrad studies. So I would like to know if you are aware that you have made it to the syllabi of literary courses from all over the world. And also I would like to know how you feel about belonging to, let's say, intellectual elite. Thank you.
Oh, well, yeah, I'm really happy that my work is being read in different parts of the world. It's really, it's obviously the ego is very is very pleased with that. At the same time, there is a weight of responsibility in terms of the things that I might have wrote simply for fun or for pleasure or just to explore some ideas are now seen maybe in some ways as representative of a certain reality, and that makes you think harder about the next thing that you have to write. I wish my book was on the syllabus in Uganda. It is not yet, because I think it is seen as too risque, because I'm very explicit about certain about sexuality, for example, and we have a very conservative government. So there's that to deal with. And in terms of language, I'm just very proud to say the title story was translated to Kiswahili. So in Kenya, it is a text for all the O-levels, that important exam you do at 15, 16. There's an anthology of Swahili. They all have to study Kiswahili, and that's one of the texts that they all have to use. So yeah. What was the second question? There is a pride and there is a weight of responsibility. I can't remember. Oh, being part of the elite. yeah, they tell us that we have to check our privilege. I am aware, you know, ever since I was young, even without the writing, because of having had an education, that already I was part of, I guess you could say, the middle class back home. A part of it is also an accident of birth. But again, also there is that responsibility that if you're seen to be saying things on behalf of, to be very careful in what I say and what I do, knowing that, of course, I will make mistakes along the way. But another thing that I like to do is I try to do a lot of teaching, creative writing teaching, to get as many more other African writers to also learn the craft and be able to write and do what I have done, and to see what I can do to provide opportunities for those who may not have them, to become writers as well. That's what my work in FemWrite and an organization I had started, which now is on hiatus because I'm here, that was nurturing creative writing across Africa. I think that's what we can do with privilege, to try and see how we can spread the opportunities that we have.
All right. So thank you so much. You are about to start a new day in Australia. All right. Yeah, we are going to.
I'm sorry. I think there's a comment in the chat. I don't know if we have the chance to read it.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, thank you too, Andre. In fact, I think maybe there are many similarities. I don't know if you consider yourselves as part of the Global South, but if there is, if you do, or maybe you don't, but the South to South conversations are something I always welcome, and I hope happen also in my work.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much, Doreen. Thanks for sharing this precious time with us. Thank you for sharing your writing, your work, and right now, these stories. I really appreciate it. It was a pleasure. So, and I wish we see you pretty soon. Okay.
Thank you so much. I wish I wish I was there live. Please invite me. The issue with Zoom now is people no longer, pay for trips.
Let's keep our fingers crossed that we can have you soon. Carlos, ¿querés cerrar vos? Carlos, you want to close the Zoom meeting?
Okay. Doreen?
Well, just to close the meeting, Doreen, hopefully we can invite you very soon. Thank you so much. So you can know Argentina.
Yes, I'd love to. Thank you.
And thank you very much for also showing us this beautiful world that appears in your book, Tropical Fish. And it's very encouraging also to see these young lives that appear in the stories, that face the difficulties and overcome them to find their place in life. And I think that the stories have a sense of nostalgia and maybe a bittersweet flavor, but I think that there's a combination of joy, that joy of the youth and everything they are capable of and how they can overcome their obstacles. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for showing us that world.
Thank you. Thank you for being open to my work. It is the greatest pleasure for a writer to be read and understood and appreciated. Like we've shared some energy. Thanks again, Federico, for organizing this and making it happen.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, Doreen. Thank you indeed. Thank you so much.